Welcome to the Snoozecast, the podcast designed to help you fall asleep. On the Snoozecast, we read excerpts from public domain works and occasionally original stories. We'd like to thank our listeners. If you enjoy our show, please be sure to subscribe and also share it with a friend. The Snoozecast is meant to be played as you get into bed. As a result, the best place to listen to us is on our website, snoozecast.com. From there, you'll be able to download or play single episodes without having to change any autoplay setting on your device or in your podcast directory. This episode is brought to you by spending time with people you love. Tonight, I'll be reading a snoozy excerpt from Creation of the Teton Landscape by David D. Love and John C. Reed, originally published in 1968. This booklet, prepared by two members of the U.S. Geological Survey, discusses how geologic phenomena are responsible for the magnificent scenery of the Teton region. Let's get cozy. Close your eyes. Relax your body into the softness of your bed. Now, take a few deep breaths. An extraordinary story. Visitors whose curiosity is whetted by this unusual and varied panorama are not satisfied with only a few questions and answers. They sense that here, for the asking, is an extraordinary geologic, earth, logic, science, story. With a little direction, many subtle features become evident. Features that otherwise might escape notice. Here, for example, is a valley with an odd U-shape. There is a sheer face crisscrossed with light and dark-colored rocks. On the valley floor is a tuft of pine trees that seem to be confined to one particular kind of rock. On the rolling hills is a layer of peculiar white soil, the only soil in which coyote dens are common. All these are geologically controlled phenomena. In short, with a bit of initial guidance, the viewer gains an ability to observe and to understand so much that the panorama takes on new depth, vividness, and excitement. It changes from a flat, two-dimensional picture to a colorful, multi-dimensional exhibit of the Earth's history. An astronaut's view. The Tetons are a short, narrow, and high mountain range, distinctive in the midst of the great chain of the Rocky Mountains, the backbone of western North America. Figure 1 shows how the Tetons and their surroundings might appear if you viewed them from a satellite at an altitude of perhaps 100 miles. The U.S. Geological Survey topographic map of Grand Teton National Park shows the names of many features not indicated on Figure 1, or on the geologic map inside the back cover. The Teton Range is a rectangular mountain block about 40 miles long and 10 to 15 miles wide. It is flanked on the east and west by flat-floored valleys. Jackson Hole is the eastern one, and Teton Basin, called Pierre's Hole by the early trappers, is the western. The Teton Range is not symmetrical. The highest peaks lie near the eastern edge of the mountain block, rather than along its center. As is true in conventional mountains, and the western slopes are broad and gentle, in contrast to the precipitous eastern slopes. The north end of the range disappears under enormous lava flows, that form the Yellowstone Volcanic Plateau. Even from this altitude, the outlines of some of these flows can be seen. On the south, the Teton Range abuts almost at right angles against a northwest trending area of lower and less rugged mountains, the Snake River, Wyoming, and Hoback Ranges. These mountains appear altogether different from the Tetons. They consist of a series of long, parallel ridges cut or separated by valleys and canyons. This pattern is characteristic of mountains composed of crumpled, steeply tilted rock layers. Erosion wears away the softer layers, leaving the harder ones standing as ridges. On the east and northeast, Jackson Hole is bounded by the Gros Ventre and Washakie Ranges, which are composed chiefly of folded hard and soft sedimentary rocks. In contrast, between these mountains and the deepest part of Jackson Hole to the west, thick layers of soft, nearly flat-lying sedimentary rocks have been sculpted by streams and ice into randomly oriented knife-edge ridges and rolling hills, separated by broad valleys. The hills east of the park are called the Mount Lady Highlands, and those northeast are the Pinyon Peak Highlands. A pilot's view. If you descend from 100 miles to about 5 miles above the Teton region, the asymmetry of the range, the extraordinary variety of landscapes, and the vivid colors of rocks become more pronounced. Figure 2 shows a panorama of the Teton Range and Jackson Hole from a vantage point over the Pinyon Peak Highlands. The rough, steep slopes and jagged ridges along the east front of the range contrast with smoother slopes and more rounded ridges on the western side. Nestled at the floor of the mountains and extending out onto the floor of Jackson Hole are tree-rimmed, sparkling lakes of many sizes and shapes. Still others lie in steep-sided rocky amphitheaters near the mountain crests. One of the most colorful flight routes into Jackson Hole is from the east, along the north flank of the Gros Ventre Mountains. For 40 miles, this mountain range is bounded by broad, parallel strips of bright red, pink, purple, gray, and brown rocks. Some crop out as cliffs or ridges, and others are badlands, bare, unvegetated hills and valleys, with steep slopes and abundant dry stream channels. In places, the soft beds have broken loose and flowed down slopes like giant, varicolored masses of taffy. These are mudflows and landslides. The colorful rocks are bounded on the south by gray and yellow tilted layers, forming snow-capped peaks of the Gros Ventre Mountains. These landscapes are the product of many natural forces acting on a variety of rock types during long or short intervals of geologic time. Each group of rocks records a chapter in the geologic story of the region. Other chapters can be read from the tilting, folding, and breaking of the rocks. The latest episodes are written on the face of the land itself. A motorist view. Most park visitors first see the Teton Peaks from the highway. Whether they drive in from the south, east, or north, there is one point on the route at which a spectacular panorama of the Tetons and Jackson Hole suddenly appears. Part of the thrill of these three views is that they are so unexpected and so different. The geologic history is responsible for these differences. View north. Throughout the first 4 miles north of the town of Jackson, the view of the Tetons from US 2689 is blocked by East Gros Ventre Butte. At the north end of the butte, the highway climbs onto a flat upland at the south boundary of Grand Teton National Park. Without any advance warning, the motorist sees the whole east front of the Teton Range, rising steeply from the amazingly flat floor of Jackson Hole. From the park boundary turnout, no lakes or rivers are visible to the north, but the nearest line of trees in the direction of the highest Teton peaks marks the approximate position of the Gros Ventre River. The elevation of this river is surprising, for the route has just come up a 150-foot hill out of the flat valley of a much smaller stream. Yet here at eye level is a major river perched on an upland plain. The reason for these strange relations is that the hill is a fault scarp, see figure 16a for a diagram, and the valley in which the town of Jackson is located was dropped 150 feet or more in the last 15,000 years. On the skyline directly west of the turnout are horizontal and inclined layers of rocks. These once extended over the tops of the highest peaks, but were worn away by some parts as the mountain rose. All along the range, trees grow only up to tree line, also called timberline, a general elevation above which trees do not grow, which here is about 10,500 feet above the sea. To the southeast and east, beyond the sage-covered floor of Jackson Hole, are rolling, partly forested slopes marking the west end of the Gros Ventre Mountains. They do not look at all like the Tetons, because they were formed in a very different manner. The Gros Ventres are folded mountains that have foothills. The Tetons are faulted mountains that do not. 3 steep-sided hills, called buttes, rise out of the flat floor of Jackson Hole. They are tilted and faulted masses of hard, layered rock that have been shaped by southward moving glaciers. 6 miles north of the boundary turnout is Blacktail Butte, on the flanks of which are west-dipping white beds. Southwest of the turnout is East Gros Ventre Butte, composed largely of layered rocks that are exposed along the road from Jackson almost to the turnout. These are capped by very young lava that forms the brown cliff overlooking the highway at the north end of the butte. To the southwest is West Gros Ventre Butte, composed of similar rocks. View west. The motorist traveling west along US 26287 is treated to 2 magnificent views of the Teton Range. The first is 8 miles, and the second 13 miles west of Togwotee Pass. At these vantage points, between 20 and 30 miles from the mountains, the great peaks seem half suspended between earth and sky. Too close, almost, to believe, but too distant to comprehend. Only from closer range can the motorist begin to appreciate the size and steepness of the mountains and to discern the details of their architecture. The many roads on the floor of Jackson Hole furnish ever-changing vistas, and signs provided by the National Park Service at numerous turnouts and scenic overlooks help the visitors to identify quickly the major peaks and canyons and the principal features of the valley floor. Of all these roadside vantage points, the top of Signal Mountain, an isolated hill rising nearly 1,000 feet out of the east margin of Jackson Lake, probably offers the best overall perspective. To the west, across the shimmering blue waters of Jackson Lake, the whole long parade of rugged peaks stretches from the north horizon to the south, many of the higher ones wearing the tattered remnants of wintered snow. From here, only 8 miles away, the towering pinnacles, saw-toothed ridges, and deep U-shaped canyons are clearly visible. Unlike most other mountain ranges, the Tetons rise steeply from the flat valley floor in a straight, unbroken line. The high central peaks tower more than a mile above the valley, but northward and southward, the peaks diminish in height and lose their jagged character, gradually giving way to lower ridges and rounded hills. Some of the details of the mountain rock can be seen: gnarled gray rocks of the high peaks, threaded by a fine white lacework of dikes, the dark band that cleaves through Mount Moran from base to summit, and the light brown and gray layers on the northern and southern parts of the range. At first glance, the floor of Jackson Hole south of Signal Mountain seems flat, smooth, and featureless, except for the Snake River that cuts diagonally across it. Nevertheless, even the flats show a variety of landforms. The broad, sage-covered areas, low, isolated hills, and hummocky, tree-studded ridges that form the foreground are all parts of the Teton landscape and give us clues to the natural processes that shaped it. A critical look to the south discloses more strange things. We take for granted the fact that the sides of normal valleys slope inward toward a central major stream. South of Signal Mountain, however, the visitor can see what the Snake River Valley does not fit this description. The broad, flat west of the river should slope east, but it does not. Instead, it has been tilted westward by downward movement along the Teton Fault at the base of the mountains. View south. About 1 million motorists drive south from Yellowstone to Grand Teton National Park each year. As they wind along the crooked highway on the west brink of Lewis River Canyon, the view south is everywhere blocked by dense forest. Then, abruptly, the road leaves the canyon, straightens out, and one can look south down a 3-mile sloping avenue cut through the trees. There, 20 to 30 miles away, framed by the roadway, are the snow-capped Tetons, with Jackson Lake, luminous in reflected light, nestled against the east face. This is one of the loveliest and most unusual views of the mountains that is available to the motorist, partly because he is 800 feet above the level of Jackson Lake, and partly because this is the only place on a main highway where he can see clearly the third dimension, width, of the Tetons. The high peaks are on the east edge. They rise 7,000 feet above the lake, but other peaks and precipitous ridges, progressively diminishing in height, extend on to the west for a dozen miles. Giant, relatively young lava flows into which the Lewis River Canyon was cut, poured southward all the way to the shore of Jackson Lake, and buried the north end of the Teton Range. South of Yellowstone Park, these flows were later tilted and broken by the dropping of Jackson Hole and the rise of the mountains. A mountaineer's view. As in many pursuits in life, the greatest rewards of a visit to the Tetons come to those who expend a real effort to earn them. Only by leaving the teeming valley and going up into the mountains to hike the trails and climb the peaks can the visitor come to know the Tetons in all their moods and changes and view close at hand the details of this magnificent mountain edifice. Even a short hike to Hidden Falls and Inspiration Point affords an opportunity for a more intimate view of the mountains. Along the trail, the hiker can examine outcrops of sugary white granite, glittering mica-studded dikes, and dark, intricately layered rocks. Nearby are great piles of broken fragments that have fallen from the cliffs above, and the visitor can begin to appreciate how vulnerable are the towering crags to the relentless onslaught of frost and snow. The roar of the foaming stream and the thunder of the falls are constant reminders of the patient work of running water and wearing away the everlasting hills. Running his hand across one of the smoothly polished rock faces below Inspiration Point, the hiker gains an unforgettable concept of the power of glacial ice and its importance in shaping this majestic landscape. Looking back across Jenny Lake at the encircling ridge of glacial debris, he can easily comprehend the size of the ancient glacier that once flowed down Cascade Canyon and emerged onto the floor of Jackson Hole.